their basic measurements so that we can be ready to do their second fitting, which is muslin. So just getting the actors, getting all that stuff sorted out was a major undertaking in itself. Okay, so next one. So there's Anthony in his muslin suit for the fitting. That's his first fitting. The reason we do a muslin is the fabric that the Phantom suit is made out of is unbelievably expensive. It's actually silk, it's not wool. And the tailors hate making suits out of it, but tough luck. But you have to get it right, which is why we actually do a muslin fitting, because you don't want to cut into that really expensive silk until you know that you've got every seam where you want it, exactly where the vest ends, what's fitting the trousers to be correct. And even then, once you translate it into real fabric, there's still a lot of tweaking. So there he is. Anthony has all the space here because he was in another play at the time. And that's his first fitting in his silk fabric. We did it in Chicago, I think. Chicago? Yes. Anyway, so the next one. So then there he is in Las Vegas, all complete, all fitted with his mask. And then of course we add the rest of the bits. We put on the hat and the capes. Okay, now I'm going to pause for a minute. Talk about detail. This is a close-up of him in his Chinese coat. And there's a lot of stuff in the show that, like, it goes by you so fast, you can hardly really focus on it. This is one of the costumes that everybody loves to make because there's so much detail in it and it's really unusual. In the beginning, we actually used to go out and buy antique Chinese coats and put them on the characters because it was in the dark and no one could see it. What a nightmare. I mean, they fell apart, they were shredding. So now we have a whole collection of antique Chinese embroideries and motifs that we just color Xerox and then we kind of move them around to do the layouts on these. And then we recreate all the kind of motifs that go into this coat so that we can make them new and so that we're strong. Because obviously, as you've seen the show, he crawls across the floor and it spends most of its time being crawled on. So it has to be a really good sturdy one. And so this is one of the ones that the shops love to make because it's very intricate, very detailed, and very pretty in the end. So there it is, all done. The front view. There we go. Next. Oh yes. Notice how you can see through this cape? Through the muslin of the back. We actually have to do a double of one of the Phantom's cape for when he's in the angel. Because whenever you have an actor in flying scenery, you need to really control the weight, the total weight overall. So everything that goes into that particular copy of the cape weighs like next to nothing. It's made out of an iridescent metallic chiffon, that's black. And then all the beading on it even is the lightest bit of plastic beading we can find. So it looks a lot like his regular cape, but it weighs almost nothing. I think the whole thing, even with the beading, weighs less than a pound. So that's why we have to actually make the copy of that cape. Okay. Ah, read that.
Woo!
Okay. Now, we're going to talk about, well, here he is. Okay. I don't want to take Lane Hell's thunder on Saturday, but I just need to talk about a little bit about why we go to such an enormous amount of trouble to put this much detail in a costume. There's this thing about how dark the show is. Almost everything you see in the show is in some kind of semi-darkness or you can't quite make out what it is. But every time I've been to a first rehearsal for this show, I've heard Hal say this over and over again, so I know it's kind of important. The darkness has to be crammed full of delicious detail. And he'll probably say this in Saturday. It's sort of like sex. Like all those little things in the darkness that are going on, you can't quite describe, you can't make out what they are. If they weren't there, you would really miss them. So it's sort of like, that's why we actually make sure that all these costumes have that amount of detail on them, so that when the light hits them, they are just incredibly luscious. Anyway, this particular costume has, just in him, there's 24 different elements that have to be picked out. There's 7 different fabrics. There's at least that many different kinds of trim. But the amount of trouble that goes into making this whole thing is sort of, and he's on stage for what, 18 seconds, something like that. But it seems to be, everybody's seen every costume, so I thought, let me put some more red down here. So that's the original sketch. So most of the time when I have it actually come to a fitting,
I love that
I
bear.
start showing them a sketch. I have no way of showing them what they're really going to look like in the end. But except when we go to Price Music Red Death fittings, because they made this little bear for the Broadway Carriers one year. After they got done making him, they fell so in love with him, they had to go to the auction and get it back. So it cost a fortune twice. But anyway, at least I could show this to the actors and say, when you're all done, you'll look like this. Here's an example. Here's Benjamin, one of our swings, in his Red Death fitting. Actually, that's this costume. This one right here. And you notice on the left side, we've moved the peplum down because proportionately it was too high on the right side. That's what we end up doing in fittings. We put things in high contrast so we can really see them, and then we sort of can then easily move things around and make sure that visually we have everything in the right place for the proportion. Benjamin just has a very long torso, so we had to really move that peplum down. Okay? And there he is with the barrel. So, there we go. Next. So now we'll move on to Christine, everybody's next favorite category. That's the Sierra box, by the way. So there she is when she becomes Carlotta in her gala skirt, that is one of the most, well, everything in the show is complicated. This one is really hard to make light enough for her to dance in, because it has to look like Carlotta's, but it has to be light enough so that it can actually swirl and like do all those beautiful pirouettes that she does in the choreography. So even though it's a copy, even though it's a copy of Carlotta's, it weighs next to nothing, because it has to. Okay, next. There's the slave girl and the negligee, which is the one that we do so we put in dress out of. This girl's their most comfortable costume. And that's what we see in the fitting. It has no ruffles. Basically what we're trying to do is make sure that we set that neckline right, that we get the wrap on the thing right, because she has to put her on stage. She can get her arms in the sleeves, because she has to do that on stage. And because of the hem, we spend a lot of time setting the hem. They have to actually be able to walk sideways like this in their negligee, which means it has to have a train that's way out to the air, which means if they can't do this in the fitting room, they won't be able to do the show. So, good luck, good. Anyways, and we set like the length of the sleeve to make sure that the ruffles frame the arm nicely. Because when you're watching this, you notice how much time she spends with her arm like this, and the ruffles have to fall just right to make that picture right. So the fitting picture is kind of plain, but that's where we make all those big decisions to get to that final product. Okay. So then I'm just going to run you through the Carol Muto costume, and then that all goes on over the top. That's the rip-away skirt that goes on over the top of that. And we'll go ahead. And this is, okay, this is one of my favorite sketches of hers, the rooftop dress. And this one is another challenge. Because, of course, we have to make it as light as possible with all that detail, because Rel has to pick her up and swing her around. So that's the beginning sketch. That's what we see in the fitting room. You know, and sort of that, the stuff, the tailoring canvas that you see in the middle, that's what stiffens the stomacher to keep it nice, and because all those bows and stuff have to go on it. So it's just sort of plain petticoat with lots of ruffles. And again, that's where we set the neckline. That's where we make everything sort of, we make sure that all those lines line up right, so that we then get to, so there's the finished one. Under those ruffles in the middle, there are two layers of iridescent chiffon that then have a layer of custom embroidered lace over the top, that then has a custom edge put onto it, and then I said there was a magic marker for her to explain that. Making sure that there's a little shadow under every little ruffle. And of course, she mostly wears a cape over it, but that's showbiz. Okay. There's Masquerade. Elizabeth Laycomb. And here's our lovely Kristen Herzenberg, who's in part of the show now. We have a costume that's in this show that's in No One in Phantom. Well, we have lots of that, but Christine in her blue sits proper dress, and normally there's a big stiff bustle in the back of it. And we have to sort of work with them really hard so that they can learn how to sit in a chair. But for this one, she has to sit on the stairs over there. And she also goes into this dress in about 12 seconds. So she comes out of her masquerade and goes into that dress like, so she was the first one we fit in this. We had to practice sitting down in her blue muscle dress. And it was also a good thing for the girls because they have 14 costumes. It's a lot of standing. So they were like, oh, I get to sit now? So she was more than grateful to practice sitting down in the muscle dress for us. Okay? And then there it is finished with the cape. Okay. This is a fitting photo of the Don Juan. And again, you can see we're fitting with the real skirt, but we use what we call coutil. It's a French fabric that is really sturdy. They use it to make corsets out of. And we actually use some real push fabrics underneath all that beautiful silk, and so that we have something to stitch boning tape to. Because those bodices are bowed, because it's supposed to look like the girls have a corset on under there, like a real Victorian corset, which would have had either metal or whalebone in it. So, and there it is all done. Notice how nice and straight the sides of the bodice are. That's the boning and the detail.